And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Looking at tonight's weather, we've got this strengthening low moving right into the Yukon Delta coast, now pushing a front with rain in across south central Alaska, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, then extending back up across a good portion of the southwest interior, moving northward there, just south of the Selawik Valley area, Kobuk Valley. Drier to the north and east of this, with this system finally kicking out of the area, taking most of the showers with it. Otherwise, Bristol Bay, breezy conditions with showers, actually increasing winds here, as we'll see tonight. This low kicks into the interior, actually tomorrow, moves into the central interior, and a good gradient back here along the southwest coast into Bristol Bay with this trough swinging eastward here. So more rain and gusty west-northwest winds, possibly reaching gale force here over Bristol Bay. Pretty gusty winds for the Alaska Peninsula as well. And possible clearing with westerly winds for Kodiak Island. And starting to dry out Monday from southwest to northeast slowly here for Cook Inlet, the Kenai Peninsula. But pretty wet conditions, northern Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley. In fact, periods of rain likely at some point in the day over just about all of interior Alaska, including the Panhandle south of the Brooks Range. And then for Tuesday, high pressure keeps the Aleutians dry with light winds and still breezy but not quite as windy, but northwest winds will make for hopefully a partly sunny day for Kodiak Island, and possibly some clearing for the same reason here over south central Alaska, with good area showers here hung up along the western Alaska Range into the Kuskokwim Valley, up into the Tanana Valley, Copper River Basin, rain and showers throughout much of the day there, as well as the North Gulf Coast from Prince William Sound into the central southeast coast. And for the coastal water forecast, southeast winds 10 to 15 knots on the south coast, south-southeast 15 knots. Central coast, north coast, east, southeast at 15 knots. Lynn Canal, southeast winds 15 knots, south at 10 knots for Stevens Passage, and about the same for Clarence Strait with light wind conditions. And for Tuesday, south coast, southwest winds 15 to 20 knots. North coast here, southeast to southwest winds at 10 to 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Lynn Canal. Southerly sustained 25 knots. And south winds at 20 knots for Stevens Passage, southeast of 15 for Clarence Strait. And for Prince William Sound, excuse me, southeast winds at 20 knots in the North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, southeast 25 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, then westerlies here, 20 to 25 knots for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Seas only 4 feet though. Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, south to southwest winds at 30 knots with seas as high as 8 feet. And for the day on Tuesday, much lighter winds in store for Cook Inlet here. West 10 to 15 knots, but 30 knot west-northwest winds for the Kamishak Bay area, Barren Islands. And then for the North Gulf Coast, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Winds east at 10 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southwest winds at 25 to 30 knots. And then for the Alaska Peninsula here, we've got small craft advisories to gale force winds from the west-southwest at 25 to 35 knots. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay, southwest tomorrow at 35 knots with 12-foot seas. And for Tuesday, Kodiak Island, small craft advisories, west winds 25 to 30 knots, northwest 30 knots there for Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, west-northwest at 20 to 25 knots. Fox Islands, west winds 20 to 25 knots tomorrow. Central Aleutians, west-northwest at 15, and mostly west winds at 15 knots for the western Aleutians. Then for Tuesday, western Aleutians, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots. Light variable winds here for Adak and Atka over toward Nikolsky. On Alaska Island, west winds at 20 knots. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island, gale warnings tomorrow. West winds 35 knots, seas near 10 feet, and northwest at 30 knots here for St. Matthew Island, Yukon Delta coast. West 30 knots for the Pribilofs with 12-foot seas, and north 30 knots for St. Lawrence Island, seas 7 feet. Outlook for Tuesday, Norton Sound, northwest at 20 knots. St. Lawrence Island coming down to 15 knots out of the west, 20-knot westerlies, Yukon Delta coast. Small craft advisories here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, northwest at 25, 15-knot westerlies with 5-foot seas for the Pribilof, St. Matthew Island, southwest at 20. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, east winds 15 to 20 knots, about the same on the central coast here, northeast 15 on the west side. And for the Chukchi Sea, north winds 25 to 35 knots with seas 4 to 8 feet. And on Tuesday, north to south winds here for the Chukchi Sea at 10 to 20 knots. East winds at 10 knots for the central and western Arctic coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, northeast breeze at 10 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas.